in terms of our original plan, or at least, the first draft of our original plan, we did have Ben Lewis down on war socialism. But when we came to deciding to advertise it, Ben still hadn't made up his mind, or he hadn't communicated. So I thought, sod it, we've really got to have something on climate. And although I was going to, in that sense, use Ben and his expertise in Germany and the high command in World War I and the origins of this term war socialism that Lenin in particular wrote about. Anyway, so here I am. That's the long and the short of it. So just to sketch the sort of background idea, and that is that when faced with an extreme emergency, the capitalist class as a collective is prepared to suspend the law of value, the MCM plus logic of capitalism, in order to preserve that logic. And we saw that in particular with Germany. Remember, Germany was surrounded in World War I. So, natural resources were being starved. It was, under attack on the West and in the East. And basically what the High Command decided to do was, basically produce war munitions on the basis of need. Now, I'm sure there were sort of people who made huge profits, but nonetheless, that's what happened. And Lenin, as I said, looked at that and said, well, if they can do it, we can do it, except we put it under working class rule. And if you want another example, nearer home, at least from where I'm speaking, and that's Britain. Britain was the most organized, militarized society in World War II. So it had a higher mobilization, more of the economy was directed towards the war than any other country, and that includes Nazi Germany. Now that was helped, of course, by the fact that the United States was willing and able to subsidize Britain temporarily. It got its money back afterwards. But anyway, that's the basic background. Now, I'm also told by Mike McNair that the origins of this word war socialism, Kriegssocialismus, is somewhere around about 1912. But that aside, I'm really, this is an idea that I've had, and it's also just worthwhile recalling our first session at this communist university with Mark Mulholland. And I think just in an off-cuff remark, he spoke about the idea of climate change because it was raised in the discussion that the working class really need to get on with things as speedily as possible. Otherwise we face, climate catastrophe. And he made the point, which I think, has got some validity, sadly enough, that the working class is in no position at the moment, and there's no immediate prospect of the working class doing anything much, let alone taking over on a world scale. And therefore, again, I don't want to, pin Mark down as there you are, that's what Mark Mulholland said. But hey, this is what I'm going to do. Basically, he said, well, let's hope that the bourgeoisie, it's almost my own words to tell the truth, let's hope the bourgeoisie, because they live on the same fragile planet as the rest of us, do something, or someone comes up with some clever bloody invention. Well, that's really my theme, because the bourgeoisie, including Elon Musk, who says he wants to die on Mars, and he's very welcome to do so. The rest of the bourgeoisie live on planet Earth, and they're going to be affected, okay, less by it than the rest of us, but nonetheless, there's no escaping from climate change, no matter how many billions of dollars and pounds one happens to have. So just to begin with, let's just look at, and I won't take long, let's look at the techno-fixes. I'm utterly unconvinced by all of them. I don't think anyone's serious, other than those who want to invest in these things and make lots of money, takes them seriously as a system fix. So just very briefly, we've got carbon capture and storage. Just look up the figures, how much it costs to store a ton of CO2. And, you know, in terms of getting back to pre-industrial levels, you know, one isn't talking about the GDP of the United States every year. One's talking an awful lot more than the GDP of the United States every year. It's at the moment where the technology is, it is a nonsense. Now, we could be in favor of carbon capture and utilization. That technology is possible, but the idea that you're going to fix the system that's been pumping out CO2 and has warmed the planet over the last 150 years, and you're going to avert climate change, and we're talking about runaway climate change, is just delusional. So of course there will be capitalists who want the government to invest in carbon capture, and there are also people who write in the Weekly Worker who want to recapture their glory days down the mines. But again, this isn't a serious solution to global warming. There are horrendous ideas, in my view, really, I suppose, inspired by the likes of, I can't remember his first name, but Basil Jett. If anyone knows London's sewage system, I think in around about 1850, there was something called the Great Stink. The Thames was full of shit, literally. And parliamentarians were sitting there in the House of Lords and House of Commons and going, we can't take any more, we've got to do something about it. And they commissioned Basil Jett to build the present day London sewage. Now, I know they've updated it recently, but it was a marvel of engineering, Victorian engineering and all the rest of it. But the idea that the planet can be equated to the River Thames, and all you need to do is bung up in the sky, you know, eye patches over the sun, or, you know, bung in iron filings into the oceans. Quite frankly, you know, we don't know enough about the climate to know whether that's safe or not. And quite frankly, you know, if they decided to put the patch above London, which meant that I got no sunshine, well, I don't see governments agreeing to that. Or do you move the eye patch around? The consequences are unknown. And certainly what I've read is once you stop doing that, what you then get is a bounce. So you have to keep doing it. And we don't know what the consequences are, except if there were negative consequences, when you stop doing it, nature sort of bites. But the idea, you know, of electric vehicles, well, you could say it's all very well if you're generating the electricity with, you know, solar, with wind. But even then, you've still got metal, you've still got plastic, you've still got glass, you know. So no, I don't know how many cars are on the road at the present time, but I think the last figure I read was over 1 billion. And what we have is a capitalist economy that's locked into the car economy. And therefore, yeah, of course, they've got a self-interest in selling people electric vehicles. Governments have got an interest in that because it gives them brownie points. But yeah, if you keep building cars, you're not going to stop global warming. You might give people a sort of, you know, a virtue, and they can signal it to their friends, I drive an electric vehicle, I'm doing my bit for the planet. But no, it's delusional that anyone's doing anything for the planet. And of course, most electricity at the present time isn't generated anyway from so-called clean sources. Most electricity still is coal, gas, oil, or nuclear. And I'll just come to nuclear. Just look at nuclear. I mean, just look at the Ukraine war and, the threat of another Chernobyl. Look at how expensive this damn technology is. And I mean, at least in terms of some of my reading on this, because you have to ask, why the hell are governments investing in these nuclear plants, which often are 20 years late, between commissioning them and when they're meant to put them into operation and when they actually put them into operation. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough and I know people who fell for the idea that nuclear was such a wonderful technology that in the future electricity will be free. Well, it's very expensive when you generate it in terms of nuclear. And of course, the reality was when they opened the first civilian nuclear power station in Britain, this was really a cover for Britain's nuclear weapons industry. And, there are those, respected scientists who say, well, the reason why Britain at the moment still invests in nuclear is to keep not just the technology, but the expertise when it comes to nuclear power, because they're interested in renewing nuclear weapons. They want the nuclear weapons technology. And again, I would make that argument. Why the hell did the Shah of Iran, why today does the theocracy in Iran want nuclear plants? Well, my answer to that is because fundamentally what they're interested in is nuclear weapons, not because they're running out of oil. So I'm very skeptical of techno-fixes. Indeed, some techno-fixes are worse than the problem itself, i.e., planetary engineering is my main example there. Okay, so at the moment, what we have is an awful lot of gestures from government. So we all know about Paris 2015, the treaty that Donald Trump walked away from, that Biden came back to. But what is noticeable about Paris and its aim to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels is they've all signed up to it. They all make their speeches at the COP conference. Meanwhile, what we have is inexorably the amount of CO2 and other such gases being released continues to increase. Now, if they were going to achieve the 1.5 degree centigrade limit, then what you would be needing to do is not just even off. What you would need to be doing is actually cutting emissions. And what we have is a course of where they continue to increase. So quite frankly, I think we have to conclude that the 1.5 degree centigrade limit, that was their target, to limit warming to that, isn't just, what was his name, the climate secretary, Sharma, saying it will, well, it's on its sickbed. I actually think it's expired. I don't see any possibility of them limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And precisely the danger is that they reach 1.5 degrees. The date that is expected, this is, the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a conservative institution, and other such institutions are predicting, let me get the dates. Yeah, they're suggesting that they will actually hit 1.5 degrees It's about 1.1-ish at the moment, isn't it? But by 2030 or 2032. So 2030, instead of that's the limit, they surpass it. They just carry on. And the prediction is that if things carry on as they are, they'll hit 2%, or we will hit 2%, 2 degrees, excuse me, between, well, roughly speaking, either 2034 or 2052, with the sort of medium year being 2043. Now, of course, what that means isn't just, as we've had in Britain, the news that, well, temperatures are on an average now 10 degrees centigrade. So that's including days like today and days like tomorrow, when it's expected to get pretty cold. Also our hot summer this year. On average, our temperature in Britain is now 10 degrees centigrade, which is a record in terms of when they've kept records. Of course, if you dig down in London, you can find rhinoceroses and all sorts of dinosaurs and stuff like that. So we're talking in modern terms. But of course, the point that climate scientists have made, and Marxists, good old us, yes, would expect, is quantity giving way to quality. And what we've got is a much more sophisticated, much more advanced climate science over the last 10, 15 years. And what scientists are predicting is a tipping point, or a series of tipping points. And all you need to do is go back and read your, books on climate and geology to see various tipping points. These tipping points don't happen as scientists once imagined, and that is slowly, you transform from one climate regime into another that might take, 10,000, 100,000 years, but certainly thousands of years. No, what they think now is that things happen extraordinarily quickly. So in other words, we don't know, and certainly I've not read what happens at 1.5 degree, what happens at 2 degrees, but what you can do is draw a straight line and ignore the qualitative question. And what we're dealing with is the threat. I would actually say it's a very, very serious threat that a whole series of well-known cities will be underwater. I mean, the list, I'll just do my list. Alexandria, anyone's been to Egypt will know this is this is Egypt's second city, but it's on the coast. Dhaka, Jakarta, Bangkok, Kolkata, Miami, Houston, New Orleans, Rotterdam, Rio de Janeiro, Osaka, Shanghai. And what we need to understand with global warming is that, even if they did hit some sort of evening out and even started to reduce CO2, what you have is sort of stored up in the system that global warming, even if you were reducing CO2 emissions, which they got no sign of doing at the present time, what you have is a sort of built-in continuation. So we would expect, strongly expect, we would predict the ice sheets, ice caps in the Arctic and Antarctic to continue to melt for 100, 200 years. So in terms of global sea levels, they will be rising. And of course, also what you get is that water, oceans retain heat, and therefore you're locked in to global warming for a long time. And as I said, that's ignoring the possibility, the certainty, surely, that at some point you get a qualitative shift. And what a qualitative shift would mean is that the climate pattern changes the weather pattern, and you can get a situation, for example, of where the US wheat belt turns to desert. You can get a situation of where Britain goes from being a mild climate to a very unpleasant climate, for example, if the Gulf Stream gets switched off. And that is a prediction by various scientists. They're already looking at a weakening of the Gulf Stream. Well, this is what keeps Scotland habitable. It's what keeps Britain not having a continental weather system and not being like Labrador, which is, I know some people who like Labrador, but it's wet, 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 dull, dull, dull weather. So in terms of British agriculture, for example, that wouldn't finish it off, but it would do an awful lot when it comes to vegetables in terms of finishing it off. So, okay, under those circumstances, which I think, scientists are saying, well, this is an extreme danger. One would expect the bourgeoisie, the state, in other words, to act. It's quite conceivable that they don't. I'm not saying that this will happen, but I am saying, well, just like in the middle of World War I or in the middle of World War II, the bourgeoisie, out of their own interest in terms of preserving their system, will act. But of course, the problem is, I've already mentioned the state. Well, global warming by definition is a global problem. And that's like expecting an individual capitalist company to act and solve some national problem. No, you need to subordinate the system as a whole. You can do that on a national level when it comes to a war, but when we're facing a global climate crisis, can you do it on a global level? Well, we can get into the discussion, but I think that's extraordinarily difficult because we have a global hegemon, yes, that's trying to reassert itself, but it's trying to reassert itself, of course, by shoving down its rivals. And we need to understand, for example, the Ukraine war, not just in the context of doing down Russia, which is clearly the aim, to dismantle Russia, how should it, yeah, basically carry on with the job that they saw, in 1991, the breakup, not of the Soviet Union, but the Russian Federation. But the main aim is, of course, China. So the idea that the United States can be busily trying to bring down, for example, the Xi regime, the Communist Party of China regime, and then cooperate, the two of them, the two largest economies, over climate change, really is stretching things. But nonetheless, I'm still putting forward the thesis of some sort of climate socialism, simply because also, even on a national level, what we would expect is severe disruption. I've already spoken about agriculture, but severe disruption of people's lives. So already, if you take, for example, countries like Bangladesh, they're in danger not just of annual flooding and masses of people being displaced. We've also seen Pakistan, but as I understand it, Jakarta, which I've already mentioned, is more or less being abandoned by the government in Indonesia. They're just saying, well, we can't save Jakarta, we can't put up flood defenses, but huge numbers of people live there, so huge numbers of people are displaced. What do you do with those people? Do you just let them fend for themselves? Well, some countries will, but you would expect under those circumstances there to be huge civil discontent. So what do you do about that? So hence the thesis, at least, some sort of climate socialism. And in other words, the measures that we're taking to deal with the crisis that global warming is caused will be done under the name of we're combating global warming, we're dealing with this crisis in the common good, or something along those lines. And therefore, precisely in my view, the danger is that in a country like Britain, those in the Green Party, Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, one can carry on with the list, which one would expect to grow. Okay, there's an elitist wing to it, but if the weather forecast is now allowed to mention the word global warming when it comes to extreme weather, one would expect this to become not a fringe question that you indulgently look at school kids coming out on Friday and saying, well, that's jolly good, and there they are, led by their teachers down to Trafalgar Square. But no, one would expect people to be angry, one would expect people to be desperate and demanding something must be done. And governments, no doubt, will carry out gestures, and that's what we've had so far. But in terms of actually dealing with things, you would need something decisive. And precisely my fear is that under those circumstances, what I'll call the Greens, and I would expect that not just to be confined to today's Green Party, as I've already argued, would actually back some sort of move by the state, could be the army, to impose something that I'm calling, for want of anything better at the moment, climate socialism. And that government, that regime, would promise to clamp down on CO2, methane, and other such emissions, could promise to reorganize transport, clamp down on private car travel, maybe including, yes, electric vehicles, ration consumption, but also precisely in order to push that through, I would expect such a government to also crack down on democratic rights. So, for example, the right to strike, the right to protest. And you could, instead of getting Extinction Rebellion rebelling against the clampdown on protest, you could get them actually joining in and applauding such measures because so dire are the circumstances. We can't have, sectional struggles, for example, on the railways. How do people move when we clamp down on private cars without the railways or buses? No, strikes ought to be banned. And of course, that's what we saw with the agreement of the workers' movement, both in World War I and World War II. Okay, it breaks down in Britain at the end, it breaks down in Germany, but that was agreed with the trade union movement. It was agreed in Germany with the leadership of social democracy. In Britain, it was agreed with the leadership of the Labour Party. In World War II, once the Soviet Union came into it, it was also agreed by the Communist Party in Britain. Okay, and also what I would say under these circumstances, just like with war socialism, you will see corruption on a massive scale. And, when it came to, remember Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, when it came to COVID, there were those on the left that said capitalism just can't deal with this. And maybe some communists would argue that it hasn't. But my view was that governments will do something about it. And I, coined, for what it's worth, this again idea of COVID socialism, because I couldn't see them coping with COVID on the basis of MC1M plus. I couldn't see it just being done on the basis of profit motive. And so what we had, yeah, is AstraZeneca, with the insistence of the Oxford scientists developing the vaccine that at least I got initially on the basis of no profit. People who are putting it into my arm. I had one injection by an estate agent, one by a lawyer, all volunteering, people volunteering to fight the pandemic, and all sorts of people going out and checking on old people and are you okay, do you want food delivered, and all the rest of it. In other words, when it came to COVID, the profit motive wasn't, well, it was suppressed somewhat, but nonetheless, what we also saw when it came to PPE, protective equipment, huge fortunes being made in the purchase of rubbish that simply was unusable. And of course, what comes to my mind is Baroness Michelle Moon, who apparently, in terms of the company that she was associated with, it is alleged that they pocketed 29 million, which is nothing. And I'm sure there are plenty of other examples. Okay, so the question I would pose is, can climate socialism, and I do mean by climate socialism the sort of thing, as I said, what we saw in World War I, World War II. This has got nothing to do with proletarian socialism. Can that bring about system change? Well, I don't think so, because I think that what we have with climate socialism is an attempt to manage the system, to temporarily suspend the law of value in order to save the system. Nonetheless, what we see with similar socialisms is the limits of capitalism. And it was under those circumstances that Lenin looked at Germany and said, well, look at that system. It works. They can fight on two fronts. They can fight against Russia. They can fight against France. They can fight against Britain, and withstand this war on two fronts, because they've organized the economy. And what we need to do is put forward the idea that all the working class needs to do is take over that machinery, democratize that machinery, and use it for the benefit of humanity. And that would basically be my argument, that if the bourgeoisie or the bourgeois state put in measures of control, subordinate production to need, that is the prelude to proletarian socialism. Now, whether we can actually get there, that's an entirely different question. What I would say is that the left's present view will not get us there, because what the left is obsessed by and limited by is this idea of spontaneity. That if you get people out on the streets, on street demonstrations, if you get people out on strike, that somehow that in and of itself will spontaneously lead them, masses, the majority of the population, to the conclusion that what they need to do is take power. I think that is delusional. And I think that strikes and demonstrations in of themselves, as well as being a mobilizing opportunity, can also, under those circumstances, lead to demoralization and lead to desperation. And I think that's what you've actually seen, for example, with Extinction Rebellion, that they had their mass demonstrations, they had their mass sit-downs. What did governments do? Basically, bugger all. We all know it. They paid lip service to it, but they didn't do anything more than lip service. And hence we get this, breakaways, such as Insulate, Britain sitting down on the M25, sitting down in the middle of London, stopping the traffic, stopping ambulances getting to hospital, stopping the delivery of vital supplies. What we also have seen is just say no to oil. There you are, you know, brave individuals throw a can of Heinz soup over a Van Gogh and then glue themselves to the frame. Some juries, good on them, find these people innocent because they've treated the trials as political trials. We all know that the government then will shift the goalposts and all the rest of it. But nonetheless, the point I would make is, even if you slash a Van Gogh, even if you start to assassinate leaders of government and heads of state, that still doesn't produce you system change. You can have 1 million people on the streets, but until that is connected with a regime project, a government project, a party, then it don't get anywhere. Then the system can absorb these protests, divert these protests, demoralize and demobilize these protests. So what I would argue is that what we need is a mass communist party. You would expect me to say that. But of course, it's not just a mass communist party, because what we're arguing here is that not only do we face a global climate crisis, but actually you cannot supersede capitalism on a national basis. You can come to power temporarily on a national basis, and we can argue how long that regime can last. We don't need to get into a bidding war on that question, but we would certainly say that such a regime is time limited, and what a proletarian regime that comes to power, even in a Europe, would have to spread the revolution internationally if it was not only good to survive, but to prosper, to start to move towards the society that we aspire to, society of freedom. Another word for that, of course, is communism. So what we need is not just a mass communist party in Great Britain, which is, hey, that's a huge task. We need mass communist parties throughout the planet. We need a communist international of mass communist parties, not an oil slick international, a collection of sects, but a genuine workers party in all the key countries, and not just the advanced capitalist countries, but where the majority of the population on planet Earth actually live, the so-called third world countries like India, China, Pakistan, Indonesia, Brazil. That's where the world revolution in its final analysis will be decided. And if we got any chance of coming to power, what we need with these mass communist parties is their willingness and success in terms of using elections if they're available. We need a situation of where before you make the decisive move to go to power, you've got things like workers' militia, the people's militia, you've got deep splits in the enemy camp, sections of the army coming over to you. And yes, you would clearly coordinate any decisive move with comrades internationally. That if you knew you were going to be isolated, it would at least be advisable to think about holding the masses back. In other words, a version of the Bolsheviks in Petrograd, when they the workers could have taken power, but the countryside wasn't ready. We need that sort of strategic conception. What time have we got? I'm just about to come to an end. There you are. Good timing, me. And I just wanted to finish just by saying that we are in the CPGB just about to launch 4 the April 21st Extinction Rebellion demonstration in London, our Little Red Climate book, which outlines our criticisms of the existing movement, both the Green movement and the left, but also puts forward precisely the sort of argument that I've just been presented. Anyway, that's it. Thank you, Ollie.